Amen. Good. Are we still in the morning now? Good afternoon. So, I should perhaps give a little warning before I speak. I'm sorry to those that were in the first service and you've heard what's coming next. But my heart is that God would speak through me to you. So, and I hope that all of us leave here knowing Jesus a little bit more, or at least wanting to know Jesus a little bit more. So, I'm hopefully going to encourage you, but we'll see. So if you can put the first slide up. So I like to think I've got a good sense of humour. This isn't one of Mike's recent trips to the British Museum. But did anybody see in the news recently that archaeologists found a mummy buried in Egypt, similar to the one above, wrapped in golden foil with scatterings of chocolate and nuts around it? Nobody saw that? No. Do you know what they called him? Pharaoh Rocher. I'm glad you're clapping now. I'm getting heckled already. I'm glad you're clapping now because you might be crying at the end. So, right, scientists have discovered you can't trust an atom. Any takers? Because they literally make up everything. Oh, we've got that tumbleweed effect now. Right. Okay, well, two more. Why couldn't Shakespeare get served in his local pub? Because the landlord shouted at him, "You're barred." Bit of literature joke there. Right, the last one. It's nearly over. If you were alive in the time of dinosaurs, did you know that it's impossible to hear when a pterodactyl was going for a wee? This is classy. I'm sorry, children. Anyone? No? It's because the P is silent. It's terrible. Right. Thank you, Joel, for the slow clap. Right. That's it. Anyway, they were mainly in the first service just to calm my nerves. So I'm a little bit nervous. This isn't my usual kind of position. I prefer to be a few steps back. But I'm sort of well out of my comfort zone. But as you know, we're in a new season. We're in a season of change. And it's important that we all step up and play our part. But on a serious note, if you've got any feedback or complaints about what I say, if you could send them in writing to Jimmy Lavery, care of Dundonald Elim Church. I blame him for this. He set as a rota before he left, and this was my week. I prayed earnestly that we'd have a new pastor before now, but you might also want to increase your prayer life after you've heard me preach. Anyways, down to business. So I've been thinking about this pretty much since Jamie left, the impending deadline coming. And I've had a few different ideas of what I could speak on. I've read through all my favourite passages. I've watched a few good preaching videos that I thought I could just, steal bits of, but nothing really stuck. So if you put the first slide up, this was pretty much my sermon preparation phase. And I kept asking God, what should I share? But as you'll see, I've been quite busy. And sometimes I didn't linger long to wait for a reply. So as this date has drawn closer, the pressure of a deadline has focused my mind somewhat. And I've yo-yoed between stressing over it and not having enough time. And then I've sprinkled a dash of procrastination. And here we are. But in that forge of increasing pressure, I'm hoping something that looks more like a diamond comes out rather than a lump of coal. So, but you can be the judge of that. So the title, if you want to make notes, I'm not sure you will, but if you want to make notes, is Do Less and Be More, with a little subtitle of Faith Over Fear. So the world wants us to do more, achieve more, make more money, be more successful. AI can save you time, help you get more done. Labour-saving devices can do your chores. We've got endless streams of music, videos that we can watch, unlimited access to information. Distractions of technology, entertainment, you don't ever have to be bored. We're constantly inundated with messages, information, all of it vying for our time and attention. And we can fill our lives over and over again with this stuff. And some of it's really good. I'm not having a downer on all of it, but some of it is bad. And some of it's just a bit kind of meh in between. So many of us, myself included, are coupled to our so-called smartphones or devices. And can I just say congratulations if you can do life without one. I tip my hat to you. I use the excuse that I rely on it for work and my clients contact me that way. But I probably could get by with a good old-fashioned brick or a landline if I needed to. But these phones can put more pressure on us. We're constantly available, we're connected 24/7, and sometimes I've noticed myself feeling like duty-bound to reply people, even when they message about work at sort of 10 to midnight. I recently discovered just how much my phone was ingrained in my life when my old phone stopped basically recognizing my face. I would hold it up, pull different expressions, and I'm not sure if it was the dust and paint that got inside the phone or it's the aging process that my phone's like, who is this? But I couldn't make it work. Anyway, so I bit the bullet and bought another phone, and it does this incredible, technology thing where you tell it you're going to a new phone, it puts the phone together, it scans the funny little code on the front, and it's busy doing its own updating thing. And then the old phone then wipes itself, or I told it to, and then I realized somehow I'd lost about a month's worth of WhatsApp messages. I was like, oh, it'll be fine. But then I was communicating with a couple of clients and realized, I was like, my list of what I was doing for you was on that kind of message chat, the dates and times of when I was going. So it was awful. I had to go back cap in hand to several clients and go, I'm really sorry, and explain the whole situation over and over again. So I'm sort of increasingly convinced that the smartphone is making me a bit thicker. Shorter attention span. I used to be able to do things like navigate across the country. I was really good. If I'd been to a place once, I could pretty much get back there without really having to look at a map. I just kind of knew the way. I've always liked maps. But now you put it into Google, then have a disagreement with Google. Then SatNav says there's traffic this way, and I'm like, no, but I know this is the best route. But anyway, I certainly find it a lot harder to do that, and I'm blaming the smartphone. But maybe it's just my age. However, pressures come in other forms. Cost of living keeps right. It just seems to be no end in the rate of rises. There's pressure on us to work longer or smarter, have a side hustle. I'm still not really sure what side hustles are, but somebody will know. Maybe you're tempted to dabble in crypto. Again, another thing I don't really understand or trust. Martin's like, no, put it into your pensions. Or there's other risky investments. We're inundated with celebrities telling us to invest in this, but can you really trust it? Church can be busy. We have family commitments, parental responsibilities. It can be overwhelming. For those of you who've got school-age children, I can probably mention 2 words that might trigger or elicit a response. WhatsApp groups and parent mail. For those of you who don't know, don't worry, you're not missing anything. But the amount of information and parents that don't know what's going on, to be honest, it makes my head spin. But bless her, Christine bears the brunt of ours, so I'm blissfully unaware to most of it. But the pace that we live modern life at is intense. And if we let it, it can really affect our mental, physical, and spiritual health. So a little story about Christine and I recently went through quite an intense season. She came out of a very busy job with just incredible pressure. She, not willingly, but she ended up being a director, and just the level of responsibility just kept increasing and increasing, and it was crushing. So eventually she came out of that job, and it was quite stressful. She was signed off sick for a long time. But she felt God moving her into a new season. She retrained as a beauty therapist, as some of you know. She's studying to be a chaplain. And all of these things really excite her. And she's like, I've got the faith for it. Me, however, I didn't quite have the same level of faith. So there's this obvious impact on our financial situation. We went from happily sailing along. If my work, which can be a bit intermittent sometimes, didn't do so well, I was like, I've got this lovely fallback. Christine's salary handsomely supported us. But you take that comfort blanket away and things didn't feel so secure. It was a massive step, leap of faith. And Christine had the faith for it, so much so she got it tagged on her arm. She'll happily show you. But I chose to try and resolve it myself. So I worked some more. I took on extra jobs, crammed a little bit more in. But this inevitably led me to getting tired, not having much quality time for my wife or the family. I got a bit stressed. That in turn had a knock-on effect at home. My family, and I promised I wouldn't mention them too much, Felt they were living with some sort of cranky regimental sergeant major, barking out orders, get to bed, I'm tired, I want my time. But when I get tired, sometimes you want to dial out, don't you, and just kind of numb yourself with some inane TV or scrolling on your phone. My algorithm knows I like carpentry videos, so I get a lot of those. But it can be like a vicious cycle. You sit there feeding, and then you go, oh, well, that didn't feel very good, did it? I've wasted hours of looking at the meh kind of stuff. So I noticed other good things were getting squeezed out of my life too. Quality time, as I said, with my wife, meeting up with friends, getting outside just for some exercise and taking time to rest. All of that kind of goes out the window. I felt under pressure that if I didn't, do some of those things, or I hadn't met up with somebody, I didn't get to a prayer meeting, suddenly you feel guilty about it. And basically, life became some sort of uphill treadmill where it felt like somebody's just hitting that plus button. You're going faster. The gradient gets steeper. And like, where is it taking you? And it felt like the destination was going to be burnout if I didn't change something. And people would say, oh, how are you doing? And I'm like, my most likely response is, yeah, not bad, that kind of very British. Yeah, I'm all right. But really, things weren't that good. And I was just crazy busy. And you can sometimes wear it like some sort of misguided badge of honor, that if people think I'm really busy, maybe that means I'm successful. But I don't think that's how God's calling us to live. So don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating sack your job off, and giving up. Don't come back to me next week saying, Paul, you said, do less, be more. I've given up your job. Don't do that. But we need to find the right balance between work, rest, and play. And I think Jesus said it best. In Matthew 11, he says, come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. That's good news, isn't it? And although we know we live in the world, but we're told not to live like the world, not to conform to its pattern, but our busyness sometimes means we put our faith in other things than trusting in God. And I found this picture and I thought, it's a little bit what my life felt like. I was thinking, I can return these 100 tennis balls, but, we know we can't, but we still try sometimes, don't we? But I admit, I find it really hard to stop. When I do try and switch off and rest, my mind is just sometimes going 100 miles an hour with responsibilities. I'm constantly preoccupied by my sort of work to-do list. And if I can be honest with you, I've got a problem with my phone. Sometimes my phone, I allow it to take too much time, have too much influence. And, as a leader here, I haven't got it all together. So hopefully that's an encouragement to you. But it's not all bad news. You might be glad to know we've come out of that downward slump. The Bible has some encouragement and some direction. So I want to look at Psalm 46. You're welcome to turn to it, but I'll kind of read it out for you. It said, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. And it goes on to say, be still and know that I am God. That's good news, isn't it? And Solomon, who we know was very wise, writes, unless the Lord builds the house, the laborers build or labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. In vain you rise early and stay up late. That's another one for me to work on. Toiling for food to eat. But it says, he grants sleep to those he loves. And Jesus tells us, he says in John, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. But I don't think he was talking about a life filled up with loads of stuff. So I want to look at a few kind of Bible characters who struggled with intense battles, were busy, distracted, afraid, and struggled to find the right balance. And hopefully that will help all of us. So first I'm going to look at Gideon. So a bit of backstory, if you don't know Gideon's story that well. The Israelites, having come out of Egypt from under the oppression of Pharaoh Rocher, they've neglected God. and many have started worshipping the gods around them. And as a result, they've fallen under the oppression of the Midianites. And it's this repetitive pattern where they sort of stumble and fall, then they cry out to God, and he sends them a prophet to remind them, I saved you from the Egyptians, but you didn't listen to me. So now Gideon, we find him busily threshing wheat in secret to keep it from the Midianites, because they've been raiding Israel and the tribes of Israel. And God sends an angel to meet with him. And you can read in Judges 6 from verse 12. And this is what it says. It says, when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. And we'll come back to that. It's kind of declaring something over him. Pardon me, Lord, Gideon replied, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all these wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. And the Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? Pardon me, Lord, Gideon replied, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. And the Lord again answered, I will be with you. I will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive. And then Gideon sort of kind of puts God to the test and says, wait there, if it's really you, wait till I come back. And God says, yes. The Lord says, I'll wait. So in verse 22, it goes on to say, and Gideon realized it was the angel of the Lord, and he exclaimed, alas, sovereign Lord, I've seen the angel of the Lord face to face. But the Lord said to him, peace, do not be afraid. You're not going to die. I love how God just knows what we need to hear. So God gives Gideon several tasks, which Gideon does. He's obedient. But at first he does them at night because he's afraid of his family and the townspeople. And then he's empowered by the Spirit of God and he blows the horn and summons all of Israel to him to fight. But then he goes into this sort of apparent crisis of confidence and he starts asking God for these specific tests. If you remember, he asked God to put the dew on the floor one night and then the next day put the dew on the fleece. And all these sort of really specific kind of things that he asked God to do. And yet God graciously goes, okay. The next day, God then begins to whittle down this sort of fighting force that Gideon has amassed. And he sends 2/3 of them away. There was 30,000 soldiers. So he's reduced it down to 1/3. And frankly, when it sort of says, anybody who's trembling with fear, they can go home. I'm amazed that Gideon didn't go, right, I'm off. God's got this, I'll leave it to God. But God further strips down their numbers till they're left with just 300. And they were facing this huge army. It describes them as thick as locusts covering the valley floor. And yet God further encourages a fearful Gideon by letting him and his servant overhear a conversation by some of the Midianite soldiers in the camp, where he hears that God has already delivered them. And it's like coming back to that initial greeting where God says, you're a mighty warrior. So this is the last encouragement. And then Gideon he knows the plan. He gets the troops together and he says, follow what I do. And they basically defeat this incredibly large army with only trumpets and flaming torches because God's fighting for them. So the lessons we can learn from Gideon, even though God knows the end, when he greets him, he says, he calls him a mighty warrior, but yet Gideon still responds with fear, doubt, and tests God multiple times for reassuring signs and questions God's word. But God, in his patient graciousness, brings about an incredible victory in his power, removing any doubt that it had anything to do with the strength of the Israelites. But sometimes I can feel quite like Gideon. I feel weak and the least in my family or community. But it's good to know that if we put our trust in him and are obedient to his word, we can still, despite our fears, be used mightily for his kingdom. And God doesn't condemn us for being afraid, but he provides patient reassurance in our weakness and still able to accomplish his plans. And just a little kind of note I wrote down to encourage myself while I was writing this. Faith isn't the absence of fear. It means acting in spite of it. So the next little character I really like, because we can associate with him and relate to him so well, is Peter. And it gives me just great comfort seeing him missing the point, acting rashly, I'm guilty of that. Distracted by other things going on around him and having some truly what can only be described as epic fails. But I love how he just goes in 100% into everything he does and has this big, passionate heart for Jesus, even though he gets it wrong. But he struggles with the busyness and distraction, and we read in Luke 9, if you put up the slide of Peter, that we can see in Luke that Jesus has healed all those that needed it. He's just fed the 5,000. Peter has even declared that Jesus is God's Messiah. And you think, oh, Peter's doing really well here. And even though Jesus has just told them again about his impending death, a few days later, they go up the mountain. And as we know, Jesus is sort of transformed in front of them. His face begins to shine. And Peter is just completely overwhelmed by the moment and blurts out this plan to start building shelters for Jesus, for Moses and Elijah. And he completely misses the point of this divine revelation where Jesus has been revealed, kind of who he is. And even God, starts speaking to them from the cloud, and they're afraid. But Peter's eagerness to do something has clouded his understanding. And all he really needed to do was just to be present and stand in awe of what was happening right in front of him. And then another story kind of where Peter misses the mark. And I've kind of coined this bit, sinking in doubt. Jesus comes to them on the water. And I don't know if any of you watch The Chosen. It's a really good series about the life of Jesus. They do this brilliantly. But as they see Jesus coming out of the violent storm, they're absolutely afraid. And they think it's a ghost, and they all start panicking in the boat. It's being swamped by the waves. But Peter goes, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come out of the boat. And he begins to walk on the water towards Jesus. But in a moment of doubt, he takes his eyes off Jesus and begins to look at the strength of the wind and the power of the storm around him. And panic kicks in, and he begins to sink. And his fear overtakes his faith. And it's just a powerful image of how our fear can sometimes derail even the boldest steps of faith. But I love how Jesus gently challenges him, reaches out his hand and says, Peter, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And lastly, perhaps Peter's most famous moment of failure came when he denies Jesus during Jesus' trial. And as we know, only hours before, Peter had passionately claimed at the Last Supper, he'd never abandoned Jesus. He was willing to die for him. But imagine the crippling reality of when Jesus looked at him right in the eye, and Peter remembers Jesus' words as the cockerel crows 3 times. That's the right way. And he remembers that, Jesus said, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter's like, no, that'll never happen. But I love how, despite his many flaws, Peter's restored by Jesus. And he becomes this sort of foundational cornerstone and leader in the early church. And I love how his story is one of transformation from fear to courage, from impulsiveness to wisdom. And it gives me great hope that where I struggle with my own fears and failures, God isn't done with you yet, or with me. And so lastly, I want to look at Mary and Martha. They're just such a great example of 2 different attitudes. And we read in Luke chapter 10, and it says, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, they came to a village where a woman named Martha opened their home to him. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. And she came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. And Jesus lovingly says, Martha, Martha, you're worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed. Or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. And the story kind of explains that Martha's attitude is one that represents busyness and distraction. She's preoccupied with serving and anxious about doing everything right. And yet Mary, on the contrary, is looking for that kind of stillness and focus on God. And she chooses to relax and sit and just be with Jesus, prioritizing presence over and learning over activity and busyness. And how often is it in our culture that we have that sort of Martha mindset, valuing productivity, multitasking, are we effective? Constantly on the go, but yet Mary's attitude and example challenges that. And she emphasizes intentional presence, reflection, and relationship over relentless activity. And although work is important, we need to get that kind of balance and be attentive to what truly matters and which will bring much deeper fulfillment for us. So I don't know about you, I find a much easier slot into Martha's camp than in Mary's. Worried about what might happen if I just let go of some of those responsibilities. But to round up, the last character I want to look at is Jesus, who I think is a pretty safe bet. Now, in my morning devotion, even this morning, it came up again. There's Dallas Willard, who's a Christian philosopher from America. He was once asked for one word to describe Jesus, and he just simply said, relaxed. And I just find it mind-boggling that in 3 years, his mission to save the planet, Jesus still found time to sleep deeply, even during stormy sea crossings. He attended parties, had time to climb hills, went fishing, and did, so much more. And yet many of us burn ourselves out in the busyness of doing to please God. And you can see that there were intense periods in Jesus' life. It wasn't always just about solitude and prayer. And it's worth noting he wasn't relaxed, for instance, when he cleared out the temple. He took time to craft a whip before unleashing it on all the traders in the temple court. But it struck me how man's business, the buying and selling, although the intentions were right, he was trying to help travelers coming from far away so that they could have animals for sacrifice, that they could change money for the temple tax. Wasn't wrong necessarily in itself, but it was in the wrong place. And man's lost sight of God in the busyness of business. But Jesus came to point them back in the right direction quite forcibly, didn't he, with a whip, and he wasn't relaxed. But he came to point them back to God and said, this is my Father's house, it's a house of prayer. But sometimes when our busyness or our work is in the wrong place, the wrong time, our spiritual life suffers. And Jesus came under intense scrutiny, didn't he, from religious leaders, even those around him. Family and friends questioned his actions and motives. And it wasn't always popular what he was doing. But even when he was doing good works and he was healing people, people still questioned his motives. But what can we learn from how Jesus handled that pressure? And in my notes, I've got, he made solitude and prayer a priority. And we can see, multiple verses how Jesus took himself away after healing somebody. It said after he healed a leper in Luke, he withdrew to a lonely place. He spent time with his Father. While it was dark, he got up early to pray. And he put good people around him that helped him stay grounded and connected to God. And the next point is, he set boundaries. So despite crowds and constant demands, Jesus didn't try to please everybody. And that's something I really struggle with. He sometimes let people and left them waiting. He walked away. He sort of slipped out of the clouds. Coming on the clouds. He slipped out of the crowds to rest or to focus on his mission. He withdrew to quiet places. Even when they tried to forcibly make him king, he slipped away. He focused on purpose, not pace. He was never rushed, moved with clarity and intention. But he always aligned his actions with God's will, even when others pressured him to act differently. And he embraced rest and community and spent time with close friends and celebrated with them too. And he modeled for us a rhythm of work and rest that honored both his humanity and his mission. So where does this leave us? So many of us, as we know, can burn ourselves out with busyness in our efforts to please God. It stifles our ability to be present in the moment. But sometimes we've got to learn those boundaries. Sometimes we've got to learn to say no to those around us. It might not be popular. You might lose friends because of it. But if you know it's right and it's from God, then I put that into that's a them problem, not yours. And it's okay to be afraid. We saw with Gideon that God didn't kind of go, he's just too fearful and decide not to use him. If God has called us to do something, we need to be obedient and to act. Even if we feel afraid or you feel weak or the least in your family, God calls you mighty warrior. And it's what he says that matters. It's what his voice is the one we need to listen to over the clamour of all the other voices. And I love it that God can use the weak. That means me and you. But we need to learn to trust him in his strength, not our own. But in order to do that, I need to be rested. I know I need to work on my going to bed time sometimes because I burn the candle too much at both ends. But I love this verse of an old hymn by John Greenleaf Whittier that says, "Drop thy still dews of quietness, till all our strivings cease. Take from our souls the strain and stress, and let our ordered lives confess the beauty of our peace." So if I can encourage you to make space for stillness in this busy world, take time out for some prayer or reflection. Meet a friend for coffee. It doesn't have to be kind of locked away in a room, but it's a good start, you know. But get a coffee with a friend and pray together. Know your yes and no. Like Jesus, you don't have to meet everybody's demands. He had that clarity of purpose, which will help us to say no without feeling guilty. And Lord, help us to set healthy boundaries and put limits maybe even on your devices. If you don't know how to do that, my daughter will be like, "Oh, Dad." But if you don't know how, we can help you. I've got a limit on mine, so I don't watch too many inane carpentry videos. And don't confuse urgency with importance. Jesus teaches us that not everything urgent is essential. And slowing down can be a sign of wisdom, not weakness. So go at your own pace. And let me finish with this. It's the same verse I read at the beginning, but I love the Message translation. This is from Matthew 11. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. That's Jesus. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace, and I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. That's good news, isn't it? So finally, relax. As Jesus says, it's finished. So thank you for your time. I hope that's a blessing for you this morning. And if anybody really felt that's kind of on the heart, we'll be hanging around afterwards. So we'd love to pray for you. But I think we'll get the band to come up and give us a final song. So I don't know where they've gone. Oh, he's there. France is there.
Thank you. Well done, Paul.